Hello, today I am doing the Read Smart tag. This tag was originally created by Reader It May Concern and Prose in Petticoats, and it's basically questions about reading and ways that we approach reading. I think that we can learn some useful things from each other with this tag. The first question is, what is your strategy to stay focused and engaged while reading? Well, I think how focused and interested I am depends on what I'm reading. If it's a topic I'm interested in and or I'm enjoying the story and it's easy to follow along with, then I'm more likely to not have trouble paying attention and to read it quickly compared to another book. So what I'm reading definitely plays a part in that. However, sometimes focusing on reading can be a struggle even if I'm interested in what I'm reading. So as for how I deal with that, within the past few months I started using a focus timer. Well, I had already been using the app Focus Friend and I quite like it, but then I started implementing it into my reading. Like sometimes I'd be like, put the timer on and then read for this amount of time. But I found that saying like read for an hour or however long wasn't always working, because sometimes, especially if I was in my bed and I wasn't that interested in what I was reading, I could just end up falling asleep. Like that's less likely to happen if I'm more stimulated, but if I'm just reading and not that interested and losing focus, I could fall asleep. And generally, I don't want to take a nap during the day, especially when it's kind of later in the day, because then it'll be hard to fall asleep. So I decided, and this wouldn't work for everyone, but for me it has been working, to read in between tasks rather than setting apart a time for me to read with just like nothing else going on. Because some people will do that and that works for them. They may want to put their phone in another room and not have anything else going on in the room and just read for like an hour or two or however long. For me, that can work sometimes, but not always. Like I said, what I'm reading definitely has a lot to do with it. But I realize I don't have to carve out a time like that where I'm gonna read for an hour. I can read in between doing other things. Now, other people definitely don't want to do that, but some people will. Some people would find it too overstimulating the way I do it, but maybe I'm in the middle of a task like editing a video or writing a letter to somebody or whatever. So I'll do that for a few minutes and then read for a few minutes. And that has worked for me quite well. It keeps me awake, helps with the dopamine, and it just has worked. So I may set the focus timer for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and then once that is up, usually I try to at least have gotten to the next page. If I haven't yet, I'll try to go on a little longer. Then I will do whatever the task is. That can even be like texting a friend, maybe if you're in the middle of a conversation. Give them some time to respond, some time before you respond, and then get back to them. Once that's done, maybe if I'm doing a task, I'll put a song on, and then I have until that song is over to do what I'm doing, and then once it's over, I will get back to reading. That's something I do sometimes. Sometimes I don't need to do that, but I have done that and I find that it works for me. So yeah, I definitely don't think that you need to just get rid of all distractions ever, which is kind of impossible for some of us, and then just read for an hour straight. I think it's important to remember that what works for somebody is not going to work for everyone else, and some people I feel kind of say their advice as if they're commanding you. Like they'll say, like I was talking about, put your phone in another room, turn off everything, which isn't the case for everyone. Some people have like a bunch of people in their house, not so much myself, but some people, and it's never really quiet and they got to find a way to work around that. So first of all, that's not even an option for everyone, and they just say these things as if that's what you're supposed to do, and that works for them and they're able to do that, and that's wonderful, but not everyone can. That's not what's going to work for everyone. And I think some people act like their advice is what's going to work for everyone, and it's just not. I think it's very important to find what works for yourself. I think it's also good to not feel ashamed or be hard on yourself if something works for someone or even a lot of people, but then you try it and it doesn't work for you. Like, that's fine. Everyone's got their own brain and life situations and circumstances, so of course it's going to work a little different for you. So those are some of the things that help me. The second question is, how does your environment influence your focus and what can you do to optimize it? For me, I try to read when other people aren't around. I don't have to turn everything off. Like, I don't turn the air conditioner off, for example. The only time that's ever off is when I'm filming, because otherwise you'd hear it. But yeah, I personally don't have like the TV on or even just like background noise. That doesn't really work for me either. But like I said, sometimes you are in a situation where there's going to be noise going on, and I'm trying to get better at being able to read in those kinds of environments. I definitely do try to minimize distractions. There are some that are just going to be there, even if you don't have anything physically. For some of us, our brains themselves are the distraction, so that's kind of hard. But I think that perhaps the more you read, the better you'll get at it. And also, if there's a time where I just can't read much or at all, I just set it down and I'll get back to it soon enough, rather than trying to force it. So I mostly just read in my room. I have read in other places though. Though for me, I find I generally read best when I am by myself, or at least not with anyone right next to me. and with as little noise as possible, minus the fan and the air conditioner. But it's not just about noise and what you can see. I think it's also about how you feel. So if I'm in bed, that can be pretty cozy, and like I said, I could fall asleep, but maybe not if I'm enjoying the book. Then I might enjoy the feeling of laying in the bed, being cozy, and having the fan on and reading. Yeah, I think it's good to just be comfortable. Question 3 says, what methods do you use to retain and recall information from what you've read? Well, the fact that I make booktube videos definitely helps with that. I think that if I didn't, I wouldn't remember the books I read as well, though I do still remember some of the books that I read before booktube pretty well, but I think this definitely helps with that. So I can go into my note-taking process for my videos. I don't annotate in my books or really have notes other than what I do for my videos. I mean, maybe if I really like something, I might take a photo of it. I'm sort of going to be answering the 5th question with this one because they're pretty similar for me. The 5th question, what role do note-taking and annotation play in your reading process? As I just said, I don't annotate currently, so there's nothing with that. But besides just my regular memory, the way that I retain and recall information from books is pretty much taking notes for them and making videos. So the way I've been doing that is, when I first started my booktube channel, I wrote scripts for the videos like after I finished reading a book based on what I could remember from it, and maybe I would also kind of flip through the book, and I found that that was not the best way to go through it because I'd be doing that with like Twilight books. I remember at least with one of them, might have been this one, I don't know, just sitting at the computer writing a script and just flipping through it, scanning through it. Of course, if you do that, you're not going to get everything because I'm not reading the whole thing again just for that. Of course, I found a better way to do it. But yeah, I would just look through it and see if there was anything that stood out, anything that I could remember once I got to that part, and then put it in the script. But I eventually stopped doing that a few months in. Eventually, I started writing down my thoughts in a notebook. I know that for my review of Cold Bath Street by A.J. Hartley, I think that was the first video where I used a script written in a notebook rather than one printed out on paper. So I'm definitely saving on ink by the way I'm doing it now. For this one, the review wasn't very long and I felt like I could express my thoughts pretty cohesively, and so I just wrote down a script. It wasn't the longest ever, and that worked for me for that video. But then, because I started that with a new notebook, I decided I would start using that notebook for video notes. I think before that I was even writing down some notes on index cards, which are easier to lose, and that wasn't the best system. I wasn't using the index cards when I filmed, but I think that I would have them there just as notes and then would add them to the script later on when I was still writing whole scripts. Nowadays my videos aren't scripted, they're just notes. So I think that's better for me when it comes to coming up with things to say and figuring that out instead of just relying on a script. So then I started to do it a little differently. I started to take notes as I was reading the books, and I put them in bullet points on my notebooks. I found that that was much easier than flipping through the book once I was done and remembering what I could, because then I was less likely to forget anything because I just took the notes as I read, and then those would be in the video and it would make sense to talk about things in the book as they happened. So that worked for me. And then eventually I started doing it with an extra step. I eventually started to write my notes on my phone, on my notes app, because doing it digitally makes it a lot easier to move things around and make it more organized, because I wasn't going to be erasing and rewriting a bunch in my notebooks. Then once I was done reading the book, I would think about if I had any additional thoughts to add to it. Basically, I would just add something to the notes app while reading whenever there was something specific that came along, something I wanted to touch on. I would also remind myself sometimes of the basic things I put, like make sure you talk about your star rating of the book and things like that. Then once I was done with those notes, I would write them by hand in a notebook, and those would be the official notes for the video because I film with my phone, so I can't really look at my notes on there, and I think the notebook looks better anyway, and I enjoy the process of transferring the notes. So I put them in the notebook, like, see what it looks like here. This side is notes from a previous video, and then we've got my current notes here. And so then that is what I look at nowadays, and that's how I do it, and I find that that system works pretty well. So now that I basically answered the 3rd and 5th question together, I'll answer the 4th question. How do you approach difficult or challenging material? Well, I try to be patient. I try to read things multiple times if needed to make sure I understand them, but I know sometimes you're not going to, especially not the first time. So if I don't understand something, I kind of just try to move on from it. But I definitely care about reading everything in a book. I think that's sometimes how I approach challenging or difficult material, is by not reading it until I'm ready. Like, there are some books that I know will be difficult or hard to understand, and so I just wait until I'm ready. I might still buy the books if possible, but yeah, then I'll go into it knowing it might be kind of hard to understand, but I guess I try to go into it with a positive mindset and think that I'm going to be learning something, and that's good, and maybe it'll make me feel smart if I've finished the book. I guess I just try to get through it slowly, which is kind of just how I read any book, really. And of course, if I feel like I need to stop, then I will. Question 6 says, how do you balance reading for pleasure with reading for personal or professional development? Well, right now I don't have a situation where I need to read a book like for school or for work or anything like that. So I can basically just read whatever I want. Well, I think that reading can do both of those things. I think a lot of books can do that, if not all of them. I guess some books are just informational and not very fun, but they're useful to know. But I think a lot of books both can apply to that. As for how I balance it, I'm not quite sure that I need to. And so then once I have my video, then I can look back at that if I don't remember much of what a book was about or I wanted to see what I said about it. So making the video is basically the third time I express those thoughts, because I write them in my phone, then I write them on the notebook, and then I say them aloud. So by then I have looked at and thought about those thoughts many times, and then when they're in the video and then people comment and have discussions about it, then it's kind of just there instead of thinking about it but never writing anything down. And so I think that definitely helps me remember what I've read. Yeah, I guess for me, I am just able to read what I want. I've never really been like, I need to read more books about professional development. If I had a specific thing I was trying to get better at or wanted to learn more about, I could do that. But yeah, I guess for me, I don't really need to do that. Question 7. What is the importance of setting reading goals? Well, some people would argue that you shouldn't set them. I think it depends on the kind of person you are and if setting those goals is going to make you feel bad or guilty, or if they're just for fun. For me, I have goals when it comes to reading, but I'm not super strict about them, and if I don't meet them, then whatever. I mean, even if I do meet them, then it's kind of whatever too, because it's still a good thing, but it's like I'm not earning anything really, so it's not too important to me. But setting goals can be really useful for a lot of things, and I think especially if you're trying to get into reading or back into reading, then having a goal could help motivate you. I think that for some people it can be satisfying to add another number to something, add another book to a list that you've read. So for some people they can be motivating, and I think they work fine for me. I think I'm able to have goals and stuff for books without it being too damaging. Well, it's not really damaging at all for me. But again, like I said earlier, I think it matters to find what works best for you. So as for the importance of setting reading goals, I think that it's not always important or necessary, but it can be nice for people who like to track things and feel a sense of accomplishment in a way where they can physically see it, especially if you do something that kind of does it for you, like Goodreads or any of those sites. Question 8. What are some strategies for overcoming reading slumps or lack of motivation? I definitely think being kind to yourself is always good. Shaming yourself or beating yourself up for not reading as much as you'd like to or not reading at all is just going to make you feel worse, and then you won't feel like reading because you'll feel like being upset or doing whatever you do when you're upset. I go back and forth between different hobbies and interests, so I try to do that without shame or guilt, and I allow myself, when I feel myself coming out of one thing, to go into another thing, knowing that a lot of things I'll just come back to. Thankfully with reading it's been pretty consistent. I've been able to do it long enough to keep my channel consistent, but there are still some times when I read more than others, and I just say, okay, right now I'm not reading much. I just say it as a fact. I try not to justify it or anything because it doesn't need to be justified, and then just move on. I still try to read a little bit each day because I know it's important and good, and I know that I like it, but I will also allow myself to do other things if I want, because reading is very good for you, of course, but I think that doing other things can be good for you as well. Or maybe doing something like that focus timer idea I mentioned could be useful for you. Maybe talking with other people about books could be useful if you have friends that read, or just talking about it with people online. Especially if you have maybe a book you can read together and discuss it, then that might motivate you to do it compared to if you're just reading for yourself. But I also think that sometimes taking a break may just be what someone needs. So those are some of my ideas for that. Hopefully that's helpful. Not all these tags have a question that says to tag people, but that's kind of the whole point of tags. So, like usual, if anybody has seen this, hasn't done it yet, and wants to, they can do it. But this is also, I feel, the kind of tag that you could do more than once. I probably won't, but like maybe your answers will change over the years as we find ways to read that work best for us. Hopefully this was helpful, and you can tell me about your own reading process in the comments. And thank you for watching.